come from different walks of life to share their knowledge and vast experience. Thank you all for joining us. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all at the 5th International Deluge and Guittari Studies in India International Conference 2021. DGSIC is an organization formed for the popularization of deluge and Guittari philosophy within India, mainly through organizing conferences, workshops, cultural events, and discussions. The foremost objective of the collective is to expedite a pragmatic engagement between the strengths of Delusion-Guittarian philosophy and the multifaceted aspects and problems of Indian society, culture, art, and philosophy. The collective has been organizing the conference since 2015. Let us watch a small video to look at the activities of the collective.
What I announce is the formation of the DGSIC Studies in India Collective. It's a new initiative. The office bearers, you won't be surprised to hear, are President George Varghese and the Secretary Manoj NY.
I would now invite Dr. Manoj NY, General Secretary, Delusion Guittari Studies Indian Collective, for the formal welcome. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Nivedita, and welcome all of you to the 5th International DGSIC Conference. And I should say that this is a significant moment in the history of DGSIC, so as in my academic life. Organizing the 5th International Conference since the inception of DGSIC in 2015. Amidst the adversary conditions that the pandemic offered to the world, Here we all are assembling for a meaningful philosophical deliberations over the next 4 days. It gives me immense pleasure to let you know that we have already organized 4 conferences, and this is the 5th conference in 6 years of DGSIC. As a General Secretary of DGSIC, I feel quite humbled and would like to take a moment to register my sincere gratitude to the great minds who have helped us immensely in building up this collective, offering consistent support to our endeavors. A special mention to Professor Ian Buchanan, the founding editor of Deleuze and Guattari Studies, who has consistently offered his unconditional support to our academic endeavors. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Sundar Sarokai, who was quite significant in conducting the first conference in Manipal in 2015 and in the formation of DGSIC. Here I must also acknowledge Professor Raghuram Raju for his consistent support in various ways in taking this project up. And I would also thank all the advisors to DGSIC who have been very generous with their support in different ways. And I should emphasize that their contribution to us, to the development of DGSIC is quite immense and critical. And thus I fall short of words to express my gratitude to them. Last year, we organized the first World Congress on Deleuze and Guattari in Delhi, which was a grand success in many ways just before the pandemic set in. After that, there was a shift in our register and we shifted our focus to publications as well. Our second volume in the Deleuze and Guattari in India series, edited by Professor Ian Buchanan, George Varghese, and me, has come out very recently, and it explores the ways in which Deleuze-Guattarian philosophy resonates with the problematic constitution of a post-colonial multiplicity, that is India. The next volume is in progress, which is to be edited by Professor Daniel Smith, George Varghese, and myself. And we are more happy to announce another edited volume out of this conference, and Professor Paul Patton will be the invited guest editor for the same. We are also awaiting the formal announcement of Deleuze and Guattari in India series soon. I feel extremely proud and happy to commence the 5th DGSIC International Conference to be held online from today onwards on a very pertinent and contemporary theme, infinite life. The notion of life has become a converging point which mooted a distinctive ontological turn in the broader humanities and social science research. And this conference attempts to address this specific turn which has chosen life as its major theoretical object from the vantage point of the philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari. And in this intense 4-day discussion and sharing of ideas, we have 1 keynote speaker, 29 plenary speakers, and 37 presenters from across the world participating and presenting papers on various topics like post-human hybridities, imperceptibility and algorithmic controls, ecomedia, subtractive communism, virocellular politics, transhuman aesthetics, digital life, etc. Let me just welcome all of you to the conference on my own behalf and on the behalf of DGSIC. I hope this conference will contribute significantly to the exploration of immense possibilities of infinite freedoms, an ecosophic future, and as an affirmation of the imminence of life. I welcome you all to the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manoj sir. Now I would invite George Varghese, President DGSIC, for the presidential address.
Can you hear me? Right?
Yes, yes, George, you're audible.
Yeah.
Dear friends, can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, yes, George, you're audible.
Okay. So I'll begin. So, dear friends, let me welcome all of you to the keynote address session of the 5th International Conference of DGSIC and wish you all an excellent time with us. Needless to say, something of a turn or inflection has occurred to everything in this planet now due to the invasion of a malign virus, which has seriously affected the organization of our conference also. That's the reason why we are forced to switch over to an online mode this time, which has also given us enough trouble of coordination. Most important, perhaps, is the management of the global time difference and geographic position of the participants. Manoj, our General Secretary, and his team have done a commendable job in this regard, and let me thank them for the meticulous organization of this conference. Regarding our organization, DGSIC, it was formed over a lack and a passion. The lack is that within India, serious discussion about the important philosophers from the West is generally looked at with suspicion and many times shunned also. Different reasons like post-colonialism, Eurocentrism, Orientalism, and even sheer uselessness are advanced as reasons in the name of an ultimately self-defeating gesture. If this lack was general, the passion was personal, especially for a few of us. We are convinced that Deleuze and Guattari's philosophy, despite its high level of abstraction, is most relevant and useful in the Indian context. Since its versatile potential stood untested, we should do something towards its introduction into India. This resolve drove us to start DGSIC, which began by organizing a conference at Manipal in 2015. Our efforts since then fructified into a series of conferences, Deleuze camps, workshops, and publications. Finally, we are here in the 5th conference now. Of course, many more such ones to go and much more to be done. In between, we had to face certain questions also from certain quarters that found our mission anomalous. They ask, why you organize these conferences on a Western philosophy in India regularly, on a yearly basis almost, when it is not happening at such a scale in many other countries, with some of them having more resources and capabilities than India? Is it something like an outsourcing of a particular job to the developing world from a Euro-American first world? We have tried to respond to this question in detail in the introduction to our volume titled Deleuze, Guattari, and India, Exploring a Post-Colonial Multiplicity, published recently. The humble answer is that such contrived divides like West Indies, North and South, First World and Third World become irrelevant for the philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari, which forcefully speaks of the interconnections of all sorts captured under the concepts like rhizomes and folds. What is important are not the partition halves, but the converging middle, the in-betweenness, where the oppositional elements assume a third nature beyond their original identities. We are trying to walk through this in-between progressive path. The result, as we can see it, is the expansion of DGSIC into a global ecumene. Despite its physical location in India, its constituency has grown truly global now. The simple proof is this conference itself, with participants from all corners of the world. Let me welcome all of you to this event and wish you the best. I must also tell you that Ian Buchanan, who delivers the keynote address today, is a very important friend of DGSIC. In fact, it was he who first suggested to me the idea of organizing an event on Deleuze in India at the Copenhagen conference way back in 2011. Ever since, his generous support has been always with us. He is also one of the editors of our joint volume on India. Let me thank him profusely for all his support to DGSIC. Now, let me first read out his bio before inviting him to deliver the keynote address on the topic Rethinking Territory. Ian Buchanan is Professor of Cultural Studies and Critical Theory at the University of Wollongong, Australia. He is the founding editor of the journal Deleuze and Guattari Studies and the author of Assemblage Theory and Method, Bloomsbury 2020. He has published on a wide variety of subjects across a range of disciplines, including literary studies, cultural studies, communication studies, philosophy, film, literature, music, space, the internet, and the internet war, as well as a number of other subjects. He is the author of the Oxford Dictionary of Critical Theory and also the editor of four book series, Deleuze Connections, EUP, Critical Connections, Plato's EUP, and Deleuze Encounters Continuum. With this, let me invite Professor Ian Buchanan to deliver the keynote address. Over to
Thank you, George. I am here. I don't know why it's not.
No, you're visible. You're visible. It's fine with us.
Oh, you can see me now?
Yeah,
Okay, there's
yeah.
a bit of a lag on the screen. Oh, there we are. Okay. So let me just start by saying thank you to the organizers of this conference, and indeed for the organizers of the entire collective. It is an immense labor, and it is much appreciated by all of us who get to attend these things. I don't know what the status in India is, but Australia seems to be once again thinking about opening its borders and allowing people to move around. So it does feel like maybe next year we will once again be able to get together in person. I have to admit I have been impressed at what Zoom conferences make possible, but I would not be alone, I'm sure, in thinking that their limitations are also obvious too, in that it really is just nice to be with people who kind of read the same books that you do and want to argue about the same things you want to argue about and so forth. So I do miss that. And there are a lot of names and faces on the gallery in front of me that I have had the good pleasure of sharing a beer with somewhere around the world, and I look forward to being able to do that again. On that note, I'm very happy to say that planning is beginning for the conferences next year. So we fully expect there to be a Deleuze and Guattari Studies conference in Mexico City, and that will be in the last weeks of June. The camp will be on the outskirts of Mexico City in the mountains in Postolan, and the conference itself will be in Coyoacan, which is not exactly inner Mexico City, but for those of you who like Frida Kahlo, it will be within walking distance of her house. So that will help you to locate it a little bit. So that's the sort of the European version, if you like. Deleuze and Guattari Studies in Asia will be in Taiwan, and the organizer on my screen is exactly to my right, Sebastian at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Humanities and Social Sciences at the National Taiwan University. He's waving. So we will be able to share more details about that as it unfolds, but for your diary, you can look to mark the sort of end of the first week of July into the second week of July for next year. And presumably there will be a conference in the works for India as well, which hopefully will also be in person. I remember when the last conference was on at the start of 2020, and I thought, oh my God, I've done so much travel, I can't face another conference. I won't have to worry about it because there'll be another one, you know, in a few weeks or whatever. And that was literally the last time I actually contemplated getting on a plane. And it has been sort of, you know, global, the opposite of nomadism ever since then. So thank you, everyone. The paper that I'm going to give is taken from my book on assemblage theory. I am in the middle of writing a sequel to that book, but it's still a kind of inchoate mess. And I didn't want to impose that upon you without the benefit of alcohol to at least help you get through the rougher patches. But hopefully this will still be of interest to those of you that haven't read the book, or even for those of you that have. So it's about the idea of territory, and it's part of I guess, a larger project that I've been interested in, which is to try to tease out what I think of as being the therapeutic dimension of Deleuze and Guattari's work. Now, I don't mean that in a strictly clinical sense. Obviously, I'm not a clinician. But I mean it in the sort of more literal sense of just simply therapeutics, a way of making your life, your world function more efficiently or more smoothly for yourself. So you could think of it as being part of the same genre as what Foucault was interested in with the idea of self-care. I've always been kind of interested in it from the perspective of Deleuze and Guattari's idea of sort of a pop analysis or a pop philosophy. I have always wondered what they meant by that, and have often amused myself by imagining, you know, Anti-Oedipus alongside Alain de Botton in the bookshop, alongside maybe How Proust Can Save Your Life or whatever. So that's kind of the broad way of thinking about what I want to do. So the key to understanding the concept of territory, I would argue, is chaos. And I guess I see chaos as being something like a metapsychological concept for Deleuze and Guattari, as much as it is obviously a physical concept as well. Defined as an existential condition rather than a physical state of affairs, though, as I said, it can be that too. And this is ground zero for schizoanalysis, which I use as just a general term for their combined project. In a nice turn of phrase, Elizabeth Gross defined the refrain as a kind of rhythmic regularity that brings a minimum of livable order to a situation in which chaos beckons. So the refrain is what brings a territory into being, but I guess what I'm saying is the reason why we need territories is as a kind of defense against chaos. So territory is a livable order produced and sustained by a refrain. Chaos then is an ever-present potentiality in both our mental lives and the physical world. And all that we have and all that we are, even the most stratified aspects of our lives, is nothing but a temporary victory over the forces of chaos, which are like a ground base to our existence. Deleuze and Guattari conceive chaos as both the absolute foundation for all thinking, in as much that it is the beginning and the end of thought, and as a kind of relative dissolution of the senses and the sensible. It is, in other words, an ever-present possibility, but one that is only realized in particular sets of circumstances. But it is never far away. It can never be entirely forgotten or ignored. And Deleuze and Guattari speak of chaos as threatening, as stalking, as trying to reabsorb the hard-won sensibility of the concept. But even though they speak of chaos as something to fear and as something we need to ward off, they are equally adamant that without it, at least a little bit, we would stultify and die. And chaos then is both life and death. In What is Philosophy, a book that is essentially organized around the notion of chaos, Deleuze and Guattari depict the disciplines of art, philosophy, and science as being locked into an eternal battle against chaos. And each of these disciplines fights chaos in its own way, but chaos is nevertheless the constant enemy. However, the aim of these battles against chaos is never to win completely and thus shut chaos out altogether, because to do that would be to induce a kind of creative stasis or a form of death in life. As Deleuze and Guattari seem to be saying, the artist has to confront chaos and let it in, but then try to give it form. There is, however, an art of dosages when it comes to chaos. One needs chaos, but only so much, and definitely not too much, just enough to disrupt normal service, so to speak, and allow creativity to flow. But as they often caution, one should not deterritorialize, i.e. exit the safety of the territory too quickly and never completely. One needs to hold on to just enough territory to build a life. Deleuze and Guattari offer a vivid thumbnail sketch of this process in their account of the career of the great English painter J.W. Turner. His lifelong dance with chaos is depicted as courting breakdown in search of breakthrough. The danger of chaos is that it is attractive to us under certain circumstances, and if we fall too deeply into it, we may never escape it. This is why Deleuze and Guattari always refer to chaos as a black hole. It captures you and does not let you get out. Far from being a blank, undifferentiated morass of darkness, though, chaos has, and I'm quoting here, its own directional components, which are its ecstasies. End of quote. So the temptation of the black hole then is the temptation to opt out of life, to refuse to participate in its daily frustrations and inconsistencies. Now, the black hole does not pre-exist our actions. It is, in fact, the product of our actions. It is, as Deleuze and Guattari put it, a machine effect in assemblages. Everything we do insofar as it is an action of desire, carries this risk of plunging us into a black hole. In this sense, then, territory should be understood as a defensive concept because it describes our means of getting out of the black holes we sometimes find ourselves in, either because we choose to go down a dark path or somehow our actions inadvertently lead us there. Deleuze and Guattari borrow F. Scott Fitzgerald's notion of the crack from his short autobiographical essay, The Cracker, to illustrate this idea. In life, according to Fitzgerald, there are three ways of cracking up, three ways the black hole can make itself felt in our daily lives. First, there are the big blows that hit you from the outside that often present themselves in terms of choice. If only I hadn't drunk so much, if only I'd kept my mouth shut, and so on. The changes that ensue, loss of life, loss of love, loss of employment, loss of respect, and so on, stay with you forever, but also feel strangely alien because one feels that if one had made different choices, things wouldn't be the way that they are. Then there are the micro cracks that occur when things seem to be going well. One might not even notice them at first. It is the corrosion that happens in one's soul when 1,000 slights resonate together. The first time someone calls you fat or a loser, you might not even notice the hurt it caused, but the damage is done. And every repetition of that slight causes the hurt to magnify as it resonates within. And then there are the clean breaks. These are the breaks you cannot come back from because it destroys all connection to the past. This is what people mean when they say about former relationships that there is no us anymore. There is nothing to go back to. The past has been depolitized. We can also see that these are the types of situation that could drown us if we didn't have some kind of lifeline, and territory is that lifeline. In each case, the crack isn't to be found in the state of affairs, which may appear unchanged to the outside observer. Despite the tumult within, the crack is in the territory, which is our existential means of occupying the state of affairs, of making it livable. Us isn't a state of affairs, it is a territory that combines two or more worlds. Our life isn't a state of affairs either, it is an intermeshing of multiple territories. The cracks Fitzgerald speaks of are fissures in our most fundamental territory, namely ourself, that allows too much darkness or too much chaos to enter and incapacitate us temporarily or permanently. So deterritorialization then is the process of leaving our territorial fortress, which defends against the despair of the potential black holes populating our existence. It is thus highly dangerous, as Deleuze and Guattari frequently remind us. In its fullest sense, deterritorialization means functioning without territory, free falling into chaos without a safety net or harness, which is why whenever we deterritorialize, we immediately seek opportunities to re-territorialize. So much so that we effectively only deterritorialize in order to re-territorialize, which is what happens when we change our minds or fall in love. We leave one territory so that we can immediately enter another. Deleuze and Guattari stipulate that there are three forms of deterritorialization, three ways of leaving territory, or what they also call lines of flight. And so a line of flight then is the path of a particular deterritorialization. And those three varieties then are negative, relative, and absolute. The negative deterritorialization is one that is overlaid by re-territorialization, which amounts to saying it is a form of change one undergoes in order to remain the same. The relative deterritorialization overcomes the inertia of re-territorialization, but can only do so in an ad hoc way, which means that it never entirely escapes re-territorialization and sometimes ends up in a black hole all over again. Deterritorialization is absolute when it succeeds in creating what Deleuze and Guattari call a new earth, by which they mean a new beginning, one that does not lead back to old territories. But just as this is the higher path, as it were, it is also the most dangerous, because one form of absolute escape is death. Following Nietzsche and Castaneda, Deleuze and Guattari identify a variety of dangers associated with each species of line of flight. The short list of the most important dangers includes fear, clarity, power, and disgust. We fear our security or the comforts we have grown accustomed to, which define the very order of things. As they put it, the binary machines that give us a well-defined status, the resonances we enter into, the system of overcoding that dominates us. We desire all those things. We retreat in the face of the unknown and harden ourselves against the call to change. We speak of the old days and call for a return to the way things were, even though in many cases they never really were that way, the fantasy of lost certainties, which pretty much sums up the sort of conservative Republican Liberal Party position, I might add. Clarity is the feeling of knowing everything, of seeing through everything, of being taken in by nothing. And though I didn't know it at the time, as I was writing this, because it was a while ago, but it now occurs to me that this perfectly sums up the position of the anti-vaxxers. And if you have come across any of those, I think you'll recognize what I'm saying. Instead of the great paranoias generated by fear, we have a multitude of micro-paranoias, which are every bit as damaging, of seeing threats in even the smallest details. And I'm quoting Deleuze here, they say, we are trapped in 1,000 little monomanias of self-evident truths and clarities that gush from every black hole and no longer form a system, but are only rumble and buzz, blinding lights giving any and everybody the mission of self-appointed judge, dispenser of justice, policeman, and neighborhood SS man. And my example here was to think of the thousands of people at Trump rallies shouting, lock her up and send her back, or the people who voted in favor of Brexit because they saw Europe as a mass of minor inconveniences rather than a grand project that perhaps benefited them. So power moves between these 2 points of view, between fear and clarity. The fourth danger, the great disgust, is in many ways the most important. And here they invoke Fitzgerald again, specifically his famous line that his self-immolation was something sodden and dark. As a prelude to asking, why is the line of flight a war one risks coming back from defeated, destroyed, after having destroyed everything one could? Why, in other words, does the attempt to escape from a black hole only increase the power of that black hole? Why, instead of a way out, does the line of flight turn out to be a way down? For Deleuze and Guattari, it is only by recognizing the strange power of attraction of this particular line of flight, replete with its dangers, that we can understand fascism. Unlike, and I'm quoting here, unlike the totalitarian state, which does its utmost to seal all possible lines of flight, fascism is constructed on an intense line of flight, which it transforms into a line of pure destruction and abolition. Fascism is suicidal rather than totalitarian, they argue, adopting Virilio's point. Suicide is presented not as a punishment, but as the crowning glory of the death of others. And this is why people cheered Hitler, they argue, because they wanted that death through the death of others. As they argued in Anti-Oedipus, there is no false consciousness or deception here, because at a certain point and under a certain set of conditions, the people wanted fascism, and it is the perversion of the desire of the masses that needs to be accounted for. And to me, this has always seemed one of the most crucial elements of Deleuze and Guattari's project, this aim to try to understand the sort of mass formations of desire. The line of flight towards abolition and the black hole it terminates in should not be compared with or equated to the death drive. And Deleuze and Guattari are quite explicit about this. They say there are no internal drives in desire, only assemblages. Desire is always assembled. It is what the assemblage determines it to be. The assemblage that draws lines of flight is on the same level as they are, and it is of the war machine type. In other words, what we call fascism is imminent to the assemblage. It is generated by the assemblage and not the unleashing of primeval instincts for violence and death. As such, it may be better to speak of the desire called fascism. The question at hand then is, how is it possible for the ordinary seeming assemblages of everyday life, such as prevailed in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, could send an entire nation along the suicidal line of flight that precipitated World War II and all the ensuing horrors? Unfortunately, Deleuze and Guattari only hint at an answer to this question, but their speculation, also borrowed from Virilio, is that the manifold miseries of daily life, such as clarity, snowball into a longing for a clean break. And exit polls following both Brexit and Trump's election in 2016 both pointed to exactly this type of desire. People wanted change, they wanted disruption for a million different reasons. And so they voted for the disruptors, regardless of whether they believed it would be a change for the better. Now, I don't say this is a kind of dogma, and it's certainly not a complete analysis. But it's kind of interesting to think about this as a problematic, because somebody like Trump was a disruptor for sure, but paradoxically, the form of disruption that he offered was kind of ultra conservative in many ways. So, kind of the opposite of a disruption. And those are the things that are quite interesting. The way people seem to vote for and desire conservative positions. We territorialize them because we need to, and we need to territorialize because we have to confront chaos, both in its originary form and in the form of black holes. The territory transforms not only the elements constituting it, but its inhabitants as well, as both the territory's creator and primary beneficiary. We not only act differently in our territory from the way we act outside of it, we effectively are different, and we derive a specific surplus value from being this way. For example, the feeling of comfort we experience in our home is a surplus value of the specific kind of territory we call home, and not merely an affordance derived from the material circumstances of our accommodation. Now, I do not mean to deny the importance of affordance, a concept that is lately very fashionable in the social sciences, but I do want to insist that it should only be a secondary consideration. We have to be wary of turning our affordances into efficient causes. We adapt our sense of homeliness to fit our circumstances and not the other way around, which is why a hovel can be homely and a mansion unhomely. It is also why words like saudade exist. There is no more keenly felt lack than the exile's feeling of lacking a home. To feel at home is not the same thing, however, as being at home. And the difference between the two is not simply a matter of affect. The territory is composed of elements it borrows or steals from the environment we find ourselves in, our milieu, and organizes it into new worlds. These elements are signs, or even more basically perceptual stimuli, which can of course take a number of different forms, from visual displays of plumage to odors to songs and even elaborate physical constructions, such as the StageMaker bird's stage made of twigs and upturned leaves. The elements by themselves do not constitute the territory. They have to be arranged with what might usefully be described as territorial intent. Now, doubtless the word intent will trouble many, but it is clear from the examples Deleuze and Guattari work through that territory should not be regarded as happenstance. It is produced quite deliberately with a precise set of effects in mind. Now, this does not mean, however, that territories are optional or incidental to our lives. On the contrary, as Deleuze and Guattari conceive it, territory is not something we can do without. Our whole lives are spent building, enlarging, escaping, remodeling, and leaving our territories. Life is a constant, ongoing process of territorializing. As such, it should be clear by now that territory is neither a spatial concept nor a material concept. This does not mean that it does not entail either spatial or material components, but it is to say that in Deleuze and Guattari's work, these aspects of the concept of territory are not considered primary. Counterintuitively, Deleuze and Guattari argue that the material components are not used to create a territory. Rather, it is the territorializing process, or what they call the T factor, which transforms materials into signs and thereby paves the way to the production of territory. Similarly, the space of the territory cannot easily be mapped or correlated with the proverbial facts on the ground. In many cases, the territory has no specific spatial dimension. It is all in our heads. And it is better understood as a feeling, or perhaps better yet, a purpose. Rather than regard them as spaces, it would be more useful and accurate to see territories as subjective states in a psychological sense, which is how the ethologist Inaugural, and one of the key theorists for Deleuze and Guattari, from which they lifted the concept of territory, suggests we should see the term. Inaugural writes, territory is purely a problem of the environment because it represents an exclusively subjective product, the presence of which even the most detailed knowledge of the surroundings offers no explanation at all. We can literally or hum them into being, no matter what our actual circumstances. And so the subtext here, which is kind of, I guess, one of the subtexts of the book as a whole, is that a lot of what new materialism is arguing, to me, seems to be kind of missing a crucial side of Deleuze and Guattari's work, which is to give emphasis to what some people would just simply refer to as the virtual dimension. In spite of their frequent recourse to the work of animal behavioral studies theorists like Lawrence and Tinbergen and Inaugural, and their terminology, Deleuze and Guattari do not simply lift the concept of territory from ethology and apply it to the analysis of everyday life, nor do they propose, as Lawrence did, that animal behavior, broadly understood, can be used to explain human behavior, as though all species were somehow the same at some deep instinctual level. In fact, they vigorously dispute ethology's construction of the concept of territory in terms of aggression, precisely because it would make aggression, and I'm quoting here, the phylogenetic evolution of an instinct, and offer instead their own version of it as a corrective. In fact, the inspiration for the concept of territory seems not to have been animal studies related at all. Rather, it appears to have been clinical, as the following passage from the refrain chapter would seem to suggest. And I'm quoting again, they say, two schizophrenics converse or stroll according to laws of boundary and territory that may escape us. It is apparent from the behavior of schizophrenics, but obviously not only schizophrenics, that the basic tenets of behavioralism are too narrowly conceived to account for the abundant variety of ways of being in the world that are evident all around us. One cannot fully fathom the logic of the schizophrenic's territory merely by observing them. One must also know what they are thinking and how they are seeing and being in the world. Deleuze and Guattari move away from the physiological models of behavior premised on some variety of stimulus and response and its cognates such as inhibition and release, and replace them with productive desire understood as an assemblage-making process, precisely because those models cannot cope with what we might think of as the imaginative and symbolic dimensions of everyday life. Their basic complaint against standard behavioralist ways of thinking is that it is too linear because it follows a kind of billiard ball logic of causality, whereas their model is compositional. The territory is an artwork, or better yet, an art event. Territorializing then is world making, and black holes are the unmaking of worlds. It is in this sense that it is appropriately understood as a form of pragmatics. Territories appear where they are required and the T factor is mobilized. The T factor is not an emergent property as many versions of assemblage theory want to claim. It is not something that spontaneously just happens when certain materials come together. Rather, it is an intrinsic capacity of the assemblage, or better yet, is one of the reasons why assemblages exist. Territorializing is necessary to our existence as social beings. The territory is first of all the critical distance between two beings of the same species. And I'm quoting here, mark your distance. What is mine is first of all my distance. I possess only distances. Don't anybody touch me. I growl if anybody enters my territory. Critical distance is a relation based on matters of expression. It is a question of keeping at a distance the forces of chaos knocking at the door. When chaos threatens, we create a territory using the resources we have to hand. If need be, I'll put my territory on my body. I'll territorialize my body, the house of the tortoise, the hermitage of the crab, but also tattoos that make my body a territory. Critical distance is the minimum amount of separation two creatures of the same species require in order to coexist in proximity to one another. And Harold Garfinkel's breach experiments offer a vivid illustration of this point. For example, in one of his experiments, he asked students to ride elevators in office buildings and stand as close as possible to the other people in the car and record their reactions. In crowded elevators, people barely noticed, but in empty elevators, it was seen as an encroachment and generally provoked negative reactions, as you can imagine, on unsuspecting test subjects. And as this example illustrates, territory has two key functions. It regulates the coexistence of subjects by defining how much space they need for comfort and security, and it maximizes the number of co-inhabitants of a particular space by assigning them specialist roles. This in turn has two key effects, the reorganization of functions and the regrouping of forces. In social terms, these two territorial effects are registered in the formation of occupations and trades, which is a reorganization of functions, and the founding of belief systems, which is a regrouping of forces. In doing so, the territory unleashes something that will always surpass it. The territory transforms forces of chaos into the forces of the earth, and the territory is the new earth, as Deleuze and Guattari say. In that sense, then, territory is not merely the ground beneath our feet, but it is also an intense center, a natal, and where we feel at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, for this very comprehensive analysis of territory. It's been really done very well. I mean, taking through all the very important points from fascism to animal behavior and what not is territoriality. Like there is no exit or no escape like that. You have come to substantiate that very well. Unfortunately, since this is a keynote, there is not a scope for an open discussion. But if you want, like, I can initiate that. But I've not seen any questions in the chat box. Otherwise, we are running a little behind time, so that if we can, that's left to you. Like, no, either way, if you want to have open to question answer, of course, like we can do that. Whatever. Otherwise, Minu will take over. And from my part, let me thank you again profusely for DGSIC for your wonderful presence and excellent delivery. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I mean, discussion is always great, but I'm happy for people if they have questions and would like clarification, they can simply contact me by email or Facebook. But yeah, I certainly don't want to derail the conference with the first session, so I'm happy to take the floor.
Generally, in keynote, we did not, I mean, go for a discussion. So this is
that's fine. Of course.
Yeah. So let me hand over to Minu.
Thank you.
Yes, Minu. Yeah.
So I take this opportunity to thank Professor Buchanan for the inaugural address and keynote, which aptly announced the beginning of this conference on life infinite. Chaos, which is an ever-ending and ever-present potentiality against which we have a defense of territorialized refrains and, of course, well spelled out, mechanisms of cracking up and ways of deterritorialization. So thank you, Professor Buchanan, for inaugural address. George, always grateful for your support to us for every event we organize. And of course, Manoj, one-man team whose hard work has made this collective flourish over these years. I'm also pleased to express my gratitude for all the invited speakers and participants for considering this collective as a platform for an academic exchange. After hosting successful conferences starting in Manipal through Mumbai, Chennai, and the World Congress last year in February 2020, I'm happy to welcome all the scholars who have come together, this time virtually, for a fruitful exchange of scholarship. Thank you once again. And now we move on to our first plenary, for which the link remains same. Thank you. Over to you, Manoj.
Yeah, thank you, Meenu. Thank you, Ian. Thanks, George, for the first session. Now we will have an official 5 minutes switching over time, and then we will start the next plenary session, the first plenary session of the conference. Yeah. Shina?
Yes, sir. Please hold on while I play the video.